Okay. Good afternoon. How are you? This is Jim Harvey, better known as Gitmo Blue from Holy Land of Hoops and the BlueNotes2.com blog. We're doing this afternoon, we're doing the 2021 NCAA basketball preview show, and we've got a distinguished panel of guests. We have Cole Pepper from WJXT 4 in Jacksonville, Florida. He's the sports anchor down there, covers the pros, covers college, ACC and SEC, covers local sports in North Florida, South Georgia, and is an expert on Kansas too, from what I understand. So that's great. Welcome, Cole.
Thank you, Jim.
We have Tristan Freeman from Busting Brackets, Pittsburgh fan and a Pittsburgh native, longtime Big East supporter from way back in the day, in the old days of the Big East. And he's the senior editor or editor of Busting Brackets. Senior editor?
Yeah, that's right, Jim. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it very much.
Not a problem, not a problem. Next, we have my favorite, my old buddy, Jack Daley from holylandsofhoops.com, the Vatican of the Big East message boards. And Jack is joining us again after last year to lend some Big East flavor to the panel. And he's a knowledgeable guy when it comes to the Big East and basketball in general. And he's one of the few stalwart Holy Landers that are not afraid to come on air and share their point of view. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to be here, and it's good to be here with Cole and Tristan. Nice to be here with pros. Jim and I will muddle through and do our best as just big time fans, but we appreciate you guys coming on board here. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and last but not least, and not here yet, are Jon Nyatawa from the Omaha World Herald, and of course, John Fanta from Fox Sports and the Big East Network. So without further ado, we'll get into this. We're going to talk top 25 lists. There's several that are out right now. The Athletic, Busting Brackets, Gary Parrish's CBS top 25 plus one. And just want to get you guys' opinion on the state of the top 25 polls. We all know they're beauty contests, but how accurate or how valid do you think these early polls are? And we know they're going to change, but who do you see as being invalid? Who's overranked perhaps, or overvalued, or who's undervalued, and so on and so forth? Fire away. Cole, you want to start, or?
Sure. Yeah. I love looking at all these different preseason polls this time of year. Before practices started, you're really judging based on past experience, usually in the tournament, and then trying to project a recruiting class. When you see there are a lot of familiar names from last year at the top of most of these polls: Gonzaga, UCLA, Kansas, Villanova, Michigan. The intriguing team to me, I think, in this whole thing is Memphis, with Penny Hardaway and what he's been able to do to bring that program back. I remember the days of Memphis State back then when they were a pretty good national power. It has been a while though, and what Penny's been able to do there has been pretty impressive in a fairly short amount of time. On last year, his top recruit Andrew Weissman really never had a chance to get going. So that's an interesting team to me. The other team I think is going to be very intriguing, that's in a lot of these top tens, is Duke, to see how the Blue Devils will perform. When you're talking about Coach K going out, John Shire coming in, he's also been doing an excellent job in terms of the recruiting. So we'll see how that transition starts to happen. I think it's unfair to say any of these polls is good or bad at this point. All of them more or less have, take 15 teams and they'll take 10 of those to be in the top 10. You don't have a lot of outliers, but it's a very safe bet when you start putting sort of the same old regulars in there year to year.
Yeah. Yeah. Tristan?
Yeah, one takeaway that I have from these top 25 rankings is just how many good teams there's going to be in college basketball this upcoming season. With guys getting the extra year of eligibility, transfers, and then you have so many guys like Kofi Coburn, Johnny Juzang coming back from the NBA draft, and even guys like Remy Martin and Marcus Carr, who normally in years past probably would have gone pro, decide to come back. You just so much talent, not only in the top 10, but you have teams like Michigan State, BYU, Oklahoma State that might not even be ranked in the preseason AP poll, but in previous years probably would have been top 25 easily. And I agree with Cole that it's hard to look at certain teams as overrated because we're kind of projecting which players are going to be good. You know, a lot of people have Purdue in the top 10 based solely on the idea that Jaden Ivey is going to have a national breakout sophomore campaign.
Right.
If that doesn't happen, they'll be top 25 good, but they won't be top 10 good. And then, you know, UCLA is a preseason top 3 team, but you can make an argument that had Michigan State not let them come back in the NCAA tournament open round game, we wouldn't even be having UCLA top 25. You know, they returned everyone from a bubble team pretty much, but it was their Final Four run that made them into this darling that we all believe is going to be one of the best teams in the country. So it's going to be very interesting to see which players have that breakout year, who does what, but it's going to be really interesting for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point on your part. Had not they had the run, they would not be in any sort of consideration at this point. And that goes for a lot of these teams because they're banking on transfers as well as top-rated classes to boost and elevate their stature in these polls. So many of these teams that are in the current configurations of these top 25 have lost 4 or 5, and in many cases 6 or 7 players. But because they picked up players from other teams in the transfer portal, or they picked up a top 10 or top 15 recruiting class, the I want to say the writers who are voting on these polls just naturally elevated them in because of name recognition, a good recruiting class, or a good transfer portal class, and the proof is in the pudding. You got to see if these guys are going to gel, whether they're going to be able to play together, whether they will accept new coaching, and a lot of factors go into whether or not they're going to meet these quote expectations. And time will be the proof. Time will tell that whether a UCLA or an Auburn or an Alabama is over projected, overrated, or not. Jack, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut into your space. Go ahead.
That's okay. That's okay. You see, guys, that's Jim's version of talking less. But I think it's interesting that you look at these things, and historically, at least in the last 10 years or so, the teams that get old do well. The teams that have gotten, the rankings are great. As a Villanova guy, obviously, I love the fact that you've got players that have been there 4 years, they come back, and with Gillespie and Samuels now, you've got folks who are in the 5-year program, and that's why I look at Kansas is with Remy Martin coming in. There's a proven kid, and he's going to really make a big difference on that team. So I kind of like the Gonzagas and the UCLA's up there with the experience level. Memphis is absolutely intriguing. I think Penny's best move was Larry Brown. When it's all said and done, I love the players, but there's only one ball, and we've seen what's happened with Kentucky over the last few years. They haven't won a tournament, the NCAA tournament in a bit. So it just is, how quickly can he get them to gel? Schedule wise, the AAC isn't necessarily as tough as some of the other conferences. So, will they be ready? So that's would be my concern with Memphis, although they're certainly going to be fun to watch.
Yeah. Okay. In the absence of John and John, we'll keep moving. Moving on to conferences. What's your take on the ACC? And we can start with Jack, since you're all warmed up.
since I'm all warmed up. Duke is really intriguing. I think that storyline, Cole, as you mentioned, with Coach K going out and Shire. I mean, clearly he's not slowing down on the recruiting trail. I just don't see them having multiple down years, and I think that they could very much be the class. It's an interesting league this year. Whether North Carolina rebounds, with Davis, remains to be seen in the seat for the first time. It's gonna, but I do like Duke, and I just think that there's a lot at play with their, with the storyline and be a part of history with him going out. I think they're going to use that to their advantage. I think traditionally in last few years, you look at Florida State just with their talent. They bring in a lot of good folks and long, athletic traditionally, and I think those are probably the top three. That's not a hot take or anything. I think that would be consistent with a lot of people, but that's how I would look at the ACC.
No Virginia?
Yeah. I possibly, they're in the mix. It's just I think Duke is kind of the darling choice right now. But that's I would see them certainly top five. It's a massive league to begin with, right? But that's kind of where I would see them, and I think you could shuffle those guys around.
Yeah. Okay. Tristan?
Yeah, Virginia might be the most talked about preseason team, because I know there's a lot of people who don't even have them as a top 25 team right now. And losing both Sam Hauser and Jay Huff in the front court, it's devastating on both ends. You have a spacing stretch forward in Hauser, who was fantastic, and Huff was one of the best interior defenders in the country. And replacing them with Jaden Gardner, who was a fantastic player at East Carolina, but you never know how transfers are going to go in Virginia's system that plays much slower pace. If he's not a 18-8 guy at Virginia, there's a really good chance that they're going to struggle in league play and potentially be on the bubble. Kihei Clark's a really good point guard, but he's not that dynamic a scorer. You're hoping Armaan Franklin can have the shooting production he had at Indiana. I don't see Virginia being a top four team. I think Duke, UNC, and Virginia is a step above everyone else. But even they have their own concerns. Duke doesn't have a lot of depth. If they lose one player in the front court, they're going to be in real trouble. They need Banchero and AJ Griffin to have all conference years at Duke. They need Jeremy Roach to be a really good point guard. Trevor Keels to give them that shooting. They have a very high, I would say a high floor, but they have a really low ceiling as well. And honestly, North Carolina may have the least roster questions, considering who Hubert Davis was able to bring in the transfer portal with Dawson Garcia and Brady Manick. Armando Bacot and Caleb Love should have breakout sophomore years. But, until we see how it works with Coach Davis now leading the way, you're going to be a little suspicious to put them as preseason favorite, which is why I think Florida State's probably the safest pick, but even they have concerns when it comes to Caleb Mills being the lead guard.
Right. They lost a lot of people down there at Florida State. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Paul?
Yeah, I agree with you on the Florida State point. And Leonard Hamilton has done a fantastic job of building that program up, partly due to what's happening on the football field. But Florida State's a basketball school right now, if you ask a lot of the Seminole alums with what's going on. And Leonard Hamilton, who was a bit on the hot seat with some fans, not necessarily the university, but with some fans a few years ago, because he just wasn't getting past the first or second round of the tournament, now has become, a guy who's we now know pretty much going to ride off into the sunset at Florida State. Whenever he's ready to go, he'll go. They do have to replace a lot of very talented players, not the least of which being Scotty Barnes. So I think FSU is going to be a team that's going to be in the mix. They're going to be in the top 25. And Tristan, I think you mentioned it earlier when you start talking about the extra year of eligibility and how that's impacting some teams and the transfer portal. Those are two wild cards that when you start projecting what a team's going to look like are so difficult to pin down. And then you talk about the transition at Duke. You talk about Hubert Davis now in at North Carolina. There is so much change right now in the ACC that may play into Virginia's favor when it all comes down to it, if they can find a way to score. They lost a lot of their offensive punch. We know they're going to defend, but if they can find a way to to replace some of those top scorers, I think they can be a top 25 team.
Okay, okay. Okay, let's move on to the AC and predominantly Houston and Memphis, I guess. But what's your take on the AAC? Cole?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a two-horse race. I really liked what Houston did last year. I had seen them play several times leading up to the tournament, and there are a lot of folks who maybe don't watch anything outside of the bigger conferences or the Big East and the ACC, SEC, Pac-12, Big 12. But listen, we know Kelvin Sampson can coach. They do have to replace a couple of guys, but I think at this point, at that level, in that conference, I think Houston and Memphis are going to be the two ringleaders in that conference for the coming several years anyway, at least as long as Kelvin Sampson wants to keep coaching. But I do think it's a two-horse race, and I think it's kind of a toss-up there. It's going to be probably more youth dependent for Memphis, but Houston certainly has developed and built something there.
Yeah. Tristan?
Yeah, I think it's clear Houston and Memphis are going to be the teams to beat in the AAC. I think the question for the conference is, will they be able to get 3 bids for the tournament? And I think the two teams most likely to do that would be Wichita State, who brings back Tyson Etienne for another year, which is huge for them. And Central Florida brings back just about all of their production from last year. And, they were a middle tier team, but I think their experience and hopefully if Oregon transfer and former top 40 prospect CJ Walker can have a breakout year, that could put UCF in the bubble territory. But it's all eyes is going to be on Memphis and Houston. Houston doesn't have, the sexy players that Imani Bates and Jalen Duren have, but they're going to be solid. They have a much better front court compared to years past, which I think will help them immensely. But it's going to be really interesting to see what Memphis does when it comes to all the talent. Because not only do they have Duren and Bates, but they bring in Earl Timberlake from Miami, who was a former top 30 commit. They still have Landers Nolly. They still have Lester Quinones. There's only one ball, and someone's going to have to take a smaller role. And it's going to be really interesting. You have Larry Brown. You have Rasheed Wallace, who's also part of the staff now. They're going to be must-see television for sure, and it can go one of many ways. It might not work out perfectly. So look, I'm definitely interested in what this conference does and see what Memphis does with the target on their backs, no matter what Houston does, because Memphis is going to be the big team to beat.
Okay, Jack?
Yeah, I agree with both you guys. I think it's Houston and Memphis. It'll be interesting to see Memphis and handling. Houston's D is always pretty solid, right? And that'll be really interesting to see. I do think Wichita State's probably the third potential bid. But again, I youth is wonderful. It's going to be great during the season to watch them grow. It just, it would worry me come tournament time. Can they really keep it going, and what kind of culture do they really build, and how difficult will it be to develop that teamwork? And as you said, Tristan, with one ball, and I mentioned it earlier, it's going to be really interesting to watch that team develop. But I really like Houston. I think Kelvin Sampson's an awesome coach, and what he's done the past few years. I mean, he was a buzzer beater away from the Final Four. Or getting to the Elite Eight, in 2018. He's built an awesome program there.
Okay. All right. Big Ten, Jack?
Yeah, it's kind of the usual suspects, Jim. I mean, I'm not sure if there's anything that I would change beyond, looking at the Michigan is, with Dickinson coming back was huge. And he's virtually an unstoppable force there. I absolutely agree with Tristan as it relates to Purdue. Can Ivy have that breakout year? I mean, a lot of people are saying Purdue is going to be, top notch, and Cole hit it too. Michigan State is kind of not being talked a lot about. I mean, they're pretty solid. So I think when in Ohio State, I mean, it's a loaded league again. I think, and I haven't even mentioned Illinois. So I think when it's all said and done, I kind of like Michigan at the top. I think that they'll rise again and be there at the end of the year. So you want to go, Tristan?
looks like they've got 7 or 8 teams in the beauty contest, at least Parrish's version.
Yeah.
And Jim, I actually think there could be more. I think the Big Ten is a conference that could wind up with as many as 9 teams in, because I think this is a very much a middle class conference this year. We've talked a little bit about Purdue, but when you start talking about teams like Illinois and Ohio State, Maryland, what Mark Turgeon has done there, Indiana, and I think the other 2 teams you could look at potentially making it as well are Iowa, even though obviously they've had to replace Garza, and Rutgers is a team that could be one of those last 4 in, first 4 out kind of teams. So I think the Big Ten is probably going to be the conference with the most teams in the tournament this year. I don't think they have a lot of teams that can win the championship, but I think they've got a lot of teams that can get in there, win a game or 2.
Yeah, well, they've proven that time and time again. Getting 9, 10 teams in, and most of them bowing out in the first round. So they've proven that. Yeah, Tristan.
Yeah, one team I'm really looking at in the Big Ten is going to be Indiana. I think when you look at all the bigs that return for them, there's little talk about Trace Jackson Davis, who was one of the best big men in the country last season, but he was just on a really bad team. He comes back. You bring in Xavier Johnson, transfer from Pitt, who's a really good point guard, had his ups and downs, but plenty of talent. You have a sharpshooter, Miller Kopp from Northwestern. Race Thompson's back as well. From a roster standpoint, you could argue that Indiana has top 15 potential. But I think we're waiting to see what Mike Woodson does in his first year as the head coach. But I would not be surprised if Indiana finishes all the way up to potentially even 3rd in the Big Ten when it's all said and done and gets a really high seed. I'm really into Indiana. I think that they're going to be one of the biggest surprises in the country.
Okay. Let's go back to our order. Cole, how about the SEC?
Yeah, one of the storylines last year was the Blue Bloods struggling, and Kentucky was certainly in that category. Duke, North Carolina had their challenges, Michigan State, but I think Kentucky's back this year. Alabama obviously had a big year last year. They have some bodies to replace as well. And it's a huge year for Mike White at Florida. This is probably a prove-it year for him. So we'll see what he can do in terms of trying to show that he deserves to have a job at a school like Florida. I think Florida's going to be a team that's going to be in the tournament. I think they have. Tristan was talking about the ceilings and the floors earlier. I think Florida has a low ceiling and a pretty high floor. And there's a big variance into what could happen in Gainesville this year. That's going to be something to watch.
Okay, Tristan.
Honestly, there's an argument that there's going to be a ton of variance for almost all the SEC teams. The no conference was as transfer heavy as the SEC, not only just Kentucky, but Florida as well. LSU's entire backcourt has been revamped with transfers with Xavier Pinson and Adam Miller, neither of who are true point guards. So how that works out will be interesting. Arkansas, Eric Musselman is the master of the transfer portals. He brings in Adise Toney from Pitt, Chris Likes from Miami. It's just, you can argue that there could be about 6 or 7 teams that at one point will be top 10 in the country next year if things work out. There's just so much talent. Tennessee may, if the 5-star big man Brandon Huntley Hatfield, if he's a star, Tennessee could be arguably the team to beat. There's going to be so much, and that's not even including the fact that Vanderbilt, who could be second to last, because I think Georgia's going to be a consensus last pick in the conference, they have one of the best scorers in the country in Scottie Pippen, who's coming back. So the SEC is going to be so fascinating up and down. It'll be interesting, and that doesn't even include Auburn, who has Walker Kessler from North Carolina, along with a bunch of transfer guards to try to replace Sharif Cooper and Justin Powell.
Yeah, but who ends up on top?
If I had to pick, I think that the safest bet would be Arkansas. I would have considered Alabama, but the injuries to Namani Burnett, who was a former 5-star prospect at Texas Tech, as well as James Rosas forward, I think that hurts their depth. I trust Coach Musselman when it comes to transfers. I can't say that for the rest of the coaches in the conference. So just for that opt out, for that, cop out reason, I'll go with Arkansas. But from a ceiling perspective, Tennessee, Auburn, Kentucky absolutely could win this league.
Okay. Jack?
Yeah, I talk about a mixed bag. I mean, it could be any one of those teams. I mean, gun to my head, I would say Arkansas as well. Be interesting to see how Kentucky rebounds. Alabama was a great story last year. It was nice to see Quinterly rebound from his transfer days at Nova, and he's found a home and he likes the style there, so good for him. But Arkansas, Musselman, he's good. He's really a great coach, and that's who I would go with coming out of it.
Okay. Moving on to the Big 12, Jack.
Big 12, I mean, today or 2 years from now? Right?
Today.
So, because I'd have Houston in the mix at that point. I really like Kentucky. I really like Kansas rather with what, particularly with Martin. I just think that point guard is so critical, and having a seasoned, experienced guy come in.
Remy Martin.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think he's going to make a big difference with that team. I like them. Beard going to Texas is enormous. I mean, fantastic coach. So again, I'm not a tremendous amount of hot takes, but you look at those two teams, they're really tough. I think Baylor is going to be very good again too, even losing Mitchell and the other guard, they're going to be tough. I'm not looking forward to playing them in at Baylor. So
they're going to make a great team for the Big East in a couple of years.
Yeah, is that what it is? Yep.
That's it?
Yep, that's it. That's all I got.
Oh, okay. Tristan?
I'll leave it to the pros.
Okay. Tristan? Big 12?
Yeah, I think Kansas is definitely a team to beat. You can make an argument that they have 4 of the 50 best players in the country. I think Ochai Agbaji coming back is huge, one of the best two-way players in the country. Jalen Wilson and David McCormick both at times look like superstars. Wilson did at the beginning of the year, and McCormick did at the end of the year. But if they both can play well together, I think it'll be fantastic. You have Christian Brown, who's a sharpshooter. And it'll be interesting because Martin doesn't have to score 20 points a game at Kansas. If he can just go for an efficient version of 13 to 14 to 15, that's all that they need. But one team that I'm really interested in is Oklahoma State, because I think we're expecting them to take a big step back now that Cade Cunningham's gone.
Yeah.
But they return pretty much everyone else. I'm a huge fan of Avery Anderson, who was a star at the last end of the year. I think he has a chance to be an all Big 12 player. Isaac Likely is one of the better all-around players in the country, and he'll go back to being the lead ball handler after playing off-ball bit with Cunningham. And they have several big men that I'm really interested in Caleb Boone, Matthew, Alexander Moncrief. And they bring in a couple of transfers, Musa Cisse from Memphis and Bryce Thompson from Kansas, who I think, considering what freshmen went through last year, that I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of sophomores play well this year. And I think those two can have a big impact. I personally, I've said this to other people, I would not be shocked if Oklahoma State is a Final Four contender at some point during the year.
Yeah. The guy who transferred from Memphis was a center. Creighton was going after him for a minute, and he wound up going to Oklahoma State. He was a 5-star. Didn't show very well in that 1 year at Memphis, but he's got a ton of upside and a ton of potential. And with the right coaching, he could be a monster. Etienne or something like that was his name, I believe. The center from Memphis.
Musa Cisse.
Asika. Oh,
Cisse.
Okay. I'm not all that great with names anyway, but yeah, he has a ton of upside. I was surprised that he went to Oklahoma State, but we'll see. Cole, Big 12.
Yeah, the other team that nobody's mentioned yet is Texas. We talked about Chris Beard and making the jump and what's going to happen there. One of the things, and Tristan's been making some great points about players and the new players, new faces in new places, but I really think that this year, stability of coaching is going to be a big storyline. How much of a difference does that make for teams contending for conference tournaments? whether you're talking, again, Roy Williams out, Hubert Davis in, Chris Beard in at Texas. When you start talking about some of these big programs who are going to be contending for Final Fours, how much does the continuity of the coaching staff make a difference with all the super seniors, with all the transfers, all that sort of thing, how that all plays out? Now, that all being said, the best coach in the conference is Bill Self. I think the most talent in the conference is on the Kansas roster, and the toughest place to play in the country is Allen Fieldhouse. I think Kansas gives Bill Self his 20th conference championship again this year.
Okay.
I just want to add one point with Kansas. The fact that Baylor is the reigning national champion and Big 12 champion, I think it's going to give a huge chip for Kansas, that they're going to be determined to show that they are the best team in the Big 12. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go unbeaten in league play, at home at least, and really show that they are the best team. Because right now, you have some people wondering with Scott, Drew, and Baylor, is there a new king of the Big 12? And I think that's going to be very motivating for the Kansas program to show that they are the best.
Yeah, it's been a long time since Kansas could paint themselves as underdogs in the conference race. So you're absolutely right.
And you know, Tristan, you mentioned Abaji. I mean, he's just such a great player. He is one of the best in the country. But I am spot on with you that McCormick down low is a game changer, and not a lot of teams can match up with him. And he looked fantastic at the end of the year. He's a problem. So they've got a really balanced team, and that's why they're, you know, a lot of people are picking them top 5.
Yeah. Okay. We'll skip the Mountain West and go straight to the West Coast in the Pac-12. Jack.
All right, well, there you go, Jack.
Cole,
Okay.
Go ahead, Cole.
That's right. I was going to say, I mean, obviously UCLA is the team that's going to get all the attention out there, but watch out for Oregon. Again, we talk about continuity of coaching. What Dana Altman has done at Oregon has been pretty phenomenal, to be able to, you know, get a team that's a Final Four contender, certainly an Elite 8 contender just about every year now. And to your point about UCLA was basically just a tournament team last year. They were a middle of the road team and almost didn't get into the tournament itself, and had that unbelievable run, and certainly have talent. But I think if the chips are down, I'm picking Oregon to win that conference, even though UCLA is going to get a whole lot more attention nationally.
Oregon's a lot more consistent by far, and Dana has a nasty habit of going and shopping in the transfer portal and finding real gems. So he does it every year. You know, if they would have had a transfer portal back in the day when we were in the Valley, perhaps we'd been a better team then. But anyway, Altman is one you definitely don't want to overlook. Tristan?
Yeah, I'm really interested in what Arizona is going to do. They have the new coach and Tommy Lloyd from Gonzaga, who I think was probably their number one option. He brings back 2 stars in Benedict Mathurin and I'm going to mess up his name, but Azuolas Tubelis. 2 guys who are all conference players who I think could really have national breakout years. The question is just going to be, how does the rest of the roster work out? They have former top 100 prospect Kier Kriisa back. He had difficulties with visas considering because of the pandemic, but he's going to be their point guard. You got guards Pele Larson from Utah. Kim Aiken originally was going to go to Washington State, but ended up coming back to Arizona due to academic things when it came to admissions. You got former Gonzaga top 50 prospect Umar Ballo down inside, who's going to be the replacement for Jordan Brown, who transferred out. Arizona has, if you look hard enough, they have top 25 potential. The question is going to be, is Tommy Lloyd, who is now away from Mark Few, is he going to be the coach that steers them into that direction? But it's definitely going to be Oregon, UCLA fighting at the top, with Arizona, USC, and don't be surprised if Washington State makes some noise with who they have returning for this year. But it will be really interesting to see what Arizona in particular does.
Okay, Jack?
Yeah, I'm echoing a lot of things Tristan's saying, because that's kind of where I was standing. I think Oregon is going to be an intriguing team. Well, first of all, we are talking about the conference champions, right? Let's not forget about that. So, we've got. I think Oregon's awesome. I think a storyline is going to be interesting is Hurley. I mean, when do we see something positive there, right? And will the natives start to get restless? So I'm curious to see that what will happen on that front. But I really like Oregon, and Altman's built an amazing place. I think you talk about Kansas being a tough place. That gym is really something special. It's interesting to watch games there. I wish we saw a lot more where they were an hour I wasn't asleep, but I really enjoy watching Oregon and what Altman's done with that team. And UCLA, again, yes, they were a borderline getting in, but that starting five is pretty awesome. And they've got some serious talent. So it'll be a great matchup between those two.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Arizona State choked on it again and Hurley winds up going the way of the Millers.
Maybe.
Anyway, we can't do this without talking about Gonzaga. So and BYU. So what's the take on Gonzaga? We know they're going to win.
Yeah, I'm going to take Gonzaga for that. I'm going to take Gonzaga for that conference. Okay.
Yeah.
Bold, Jack. Bold.
Bold statement.
What about BYU?
You read the press, they want to make a statement before they go, right? And they've got some talent. I think they're clearly, from my perspective, the number 2 team, and they're going to give them a run for their money, and at home, that's for sure. So they'll be fun. They'll be fun, and I think that they're obviously a tournament team. It's interesting. St. Mary's is usually has been there, right? I'm curious to see how they do this year. What the Australian pipeline looks like. But I do like BYU, but Gonzaga is just loaded, absolutely loaded.
Yeah, a couple of the early polls have BYU ranked, so at the bottom of the poll, but nonetheless ranked. So they're getting some respect early on, and we'll see. Tristan?
Yeah, it's interesting because this might honestly be, in my recent memory, the deepest the WCC has been. They absolutely killed it in the transfer portal. You started with BYU. You bring in Tejon Lucas, who is an all-conference player for Milwaukee and Horizon League. Seneca Knight, who averaged 18 a game at San Jose State. And then not only just them, LMU added a 20-point game scorer in Cam Shelton, while also bringing back Eli Scott, who, if you haven't seen him, is one of the most versatile players in the country. He's like a 6'8" guard, point forward, center, who pretty much does it all for them. LMU has a ton of talent. San Francisco is one of the best backcourts in the country in Jamore Brule and Khalil Shabazz, and they upgraded their front court. They should be a threat. St. Mary's returns everyone, and Randy Bennett's rosters never have back-to-back bad years. And even Santa Clara with Joseph Rankic in the front court, they've always given Gonzaga a tough time. So I wouldn't overlook Gonzaga taking at least one loss in league play. In the WCC, depending on what happens in non-conference, I would not be shocked if they're a 2 or 3 bit league, because there's a lot of talent outside of Spokane in that conference.
Okay, Cole?
Well, I'll just ask the panel this question. Is there a bigger gap between Gonzaga and the rest of the conference, or Villanova and the rest of the Big East? Because I think those are the 2 conferences that have the 2 clearest number 1 teams. Certainly last year, Gonzaga, among, they didn't win the championship, but they're one of the best teams we've seen in a long, long time. But I still think there's a huge gap there. You talk about 1 to 2, and I think BYU is probably the clear cut 2. But it's Gonzaga's world, and everybody else is just living in it in that conference.
Okay. We're going to get to the Big East in a minute, but I would like to address that last question you threw out there. Nova versus the little 10, I guess now, versus Gonzaga and the little 12. The Big East has closed the gap somewhat the last couple of years on Villanova. It hasn't been the same Villanova that we saw 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, where there were 4 or 5 games better than everybody else. 2 years ago, we had a tripartite champion in the Big East. Last year, Creighton choked their way out of the championship rather than winning it. They were clearly the better team, but they didn't win.
Wait, hey, wait, whoa.
They didn't win the regular season, and they didn't win the Big East tournament, and they were obviously the better team. But yeah, the fact of the matter is, you can't go against Villanova because they are consistently and have been consistently the standard of the Big East. But the gap has closed. They're no longer a runaway favorite every year, as seen by the last couple of years. Anyway, okay, yeah, Jack.
Well, I beg to differ in terms of who was a better team, but that's water under the bridge. You know, Jim, you made a point that they were the runaway winner the last few years. You know, in 2018 when they won the national championship, they did not win the regular season. Xavier did. You know, they had injuries, right? And you know, when they were healthy, they didn't lose. But you know, but they obviously it's a different team. I think there's a gap. It's a really interesting question, Cole. You know, I would say there's clearly a top tier with Nova, and then you've got the UConn, Xavier's, Providence, and Seton Hall probably next in the mix, and St. John's as well. I think the gap is probably bigger with Gonzaga in there, who's in second there is my guess. I just think that the Big East is a little bit tighter in that next tier. I think it's fairly close. I mean, I'm certainly not going to undersell Nova. I think they're stacked. This is his deepest team in years. And it'd be curious to see how he plays them out too.
Yeah, we can't close out the national without talking a little bit about the middies. St. Bonaventure is ranked. You know, they were ranked last year. Belmont is a force. There's 2 or 3 mid-major teams that are definitely worth consideration. So Jack, since we're at your end anyway, what say you about?
Yeah, I like St. Bonaventure. I really do, and I think they're playing Seton Hall early on. That's going to be a really interesting game. You know, and watch Ionia, man. Patino's real, yeah. Oh yeah, they're going to be tough. They're going to give teams problems. He's starting to bring in he's brought in his guys. He's brought in folks through transfers. They're going to cause some problems, I think. But yeah, there are going to be some interesting mid majors. You know, the conference alignment and talking about how it's going to impact with the bids and all that. I still think the cream is going to rise with some of these teams that are considered mid-majors. And again, I really like St. Bonaventure. I think that's an interesting team.
And Howard.
Yeah, and Howard.
Bison. Yeah. And the Bison. Yeah. Tristan?
Yeah, St. Bonaventure seems to be the consensus non-Gonzaga best mid-major coming to the preseason. One team that I really love personally is Nevada. They bring back Grant Sherfield, who's one of the best guards in the country last year. Desmond Cambridge, who, you know, Ivy League transfers are sort of hit or miss whenever they leave the league. He was fantastic for them last year, averaging over 16 a game. And they bring in AJ Brahma, who averaged 21 and 10 in 10 games for Robert Morris last year. It's kind of tricky to figure if those stats are going to go over to the Mountain West, but there's a lot of talent for Nevada. Colorado State brings back everyone from a 24-win team. And you look at the Missouri Valley could make an argument they have 4 top 50 teams.
Yeah.
And Drake, who brings back everybody except for Yusefu, but they brought in a guard to replace him. Loyola Chicago loses Krutwig, but brings back literally everyone else. Mm-hmm. And I think Drew Valentine's going to be a future star in the making as he replaces Porter Moser. Missouri State has Gage Prim, who's a fantastic big man in the conference. They should be good. And Northern Iowa was bad last year due to injuries, but AJ Green, who is the former conference player of the year, he's coming back for this year too. So that's going to be a really compelling title race, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Missouri Valley gets multiple bids again.
Okay, wow. Cole?
I'll just throw out one other mid-major because I like a number of the schools that you guys have talked about. But Oral Roberts, Max Abmas thought about going to the NBA, decided to come back. They were kind of a Cinderella story last year. They're a team to watch again. When you have teams who have had success in the tournament, the confidence level, rises so dramatically, particularly if you're a mid-major. So watch out for ORU.
Yeah, and they were fun to watch, weren't they?
For sure.
That was a fun team.
Okay. All right, fellas, thank you very much for this one.